Just in case the red seats and seatbelt weren't enough of a tell, I'm driving the new Honda Civic Type R. This isn't Grandma's Civic. No, it produces 315 horsepower and 310 pound-feet of torque from its 2-liter turbocharged inline-4. It has only a 6-speed manual transmission with a very cool metal shifter, and if you have a problem with that, well, your complaints will be thrown into the trash. It has 3 fat tailpipes, and it is front-wheel drive only. So it's bound to come up a little later. The front suspension differs significantly from other Civics. The steering features unique tuning, and this is now the only Civic with adaptive dampers, which do a great job of kicking ass on a track without kicking your ass everywhere else. Now it has bigger Brembo brakes, Michelin Pilot Sport rubber, and a variety of aerodynamic enhancements that, unlike those of the last Type R, are rather subtle in their appearance. Well, except for the wing. Basically, this new Type R is better to drive, but it's also a little more grown up. But it also now has an honest-to-goodness competitor. And there's absolutely nothing grown up about it.
This is the Toyota GR Corolla, and it's one of the hottest new things on the road today. The GR stands for Gazoo Racing, which is Toyota's motorsport and performance car division. Now, I only have a tiny little 1.6-liter 3-cylinder engine under the hood, but the engineers managed to extract 300 horsepower and 273 pound-feet of torque. You can only get it with the 6-speed manual, and all-wheel drive is standard. Now, in addition to the obligatory sport modes, you also get this trick little dial here in the center console that allows you to distribute the power between the front and rear wheels. Regularly, it's a 50-50 split, but you can also choose 60-40 or 30-70 for some tail-happy antics. Now, the GR suspension is completely different from the regular Corolla. And unlike the Civic that James is driving, this does not have adaptive dampers. If you ask me, doesn't really need it either. This particular Corolla is the mid-range circuit trim, and it adds a front and rear limited slip differential as well as a carbon fiber roof and some tech and other appearance features. This is certainly not your average Corolla, nor is it your typical Toyota, because this is legitimately fun.
Hi, Mark.
Hey, James.
So, GR Corolla.
Yeah, it's a hell of a thing.
And Civic Type R.
Also a hell of a thing.
Yeah. They just beg for a comparison test.
And that's why we're here, right?
That's exactly why we're here in Malibu. And rather than chit-chatting outside the cars, I would like to get into the GR Corolla and actually drive it, because I have not driven it not on a track.
Same for me with Civic Type R, so let's hit the road.
Let's go. Okay, Mark, so we've now both driven both cars on the road. You've just driven the Type R. What do you think compared to this?
Well, honestly, there's a much bigger difference than I was expecting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the personalities are so different that I don't think there's a right or wrong here, because it really does come down to what are you looking for? This is a little more rough and tumble, a little raw, a little louder, and I like it for that.
Yeah.
But I also like the Civic Type R because it's more refined. It feels like it's built way better. Yeah. There's not as much rumbling, there's not as much creaking, but it feels heavier, even though it isn't.
Really?
So that's a lot of the tuning. But these two are so equally matched when it comes to price and power. Now, the price with this Circuit Edition is within $400 of this, but the base model is quite a bit less expensive. And you can really tell where they cut corners to get the all-wheel drive versus, let's say, interior quality and refinement.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the all-wheel drive, because to me, that is like the big ticket item of this and the big differentiator between the two cars. Now, I will say, going into this, I thought that, but then driving them back to back, like, wow, this is just like, it just feels so much more like livelier. Like,
Oh, yeah.
Like even the steering in this car, it's like initially like a little lighter than in the Civic, but it's just a little crisper, and it's just, yeah, it's lively. It's
responsive.
Yes.
It wants to play.
Yeah.
You don't really have to work to get it. There is one thing I would possibly change on this, or maybe two things actually. It doesn't quite have enough torque for me to break the wheels loose in a turn. So, I mean, I am really just stomping on the pedal, trying to get the rears to kind of swing out a little bit. It just doesn't have the power to do that. But I think what I do instead of adding power is putting crappier tires on it. Remember the first year FRS and those terrible tires that were so much fun?
Yeah.
That's what I want out of this.
These so-called Prius tires.
Yes.
So let's talk about this all-wheel drive system, because to me it's a big ticket item. And, you know, with that 30-70 split, you mentioned that you couldn't really break the wheels loose. I couldn't on the track. I think you have to drive like a complete imbecile.
Oh, I was.
Yeah, or you were and it didn't?
No. I downshifted into first to try and get those revs really high to goose the clutch to get it to break loose. No. You just don't have the torque. It makes a lot of cool noises, but yeah, I think it just needs all seasons.
Those expecting the rear bias mode to be some drift mode are going to be disappointed. It is not that. But I will say, so on the track, I thought that mode was a really good way of going slower, because the 50-50 track mode was just so much more capable. But I did have that sneaking suspicion that on a road like this, a real road, it would add a little more verve and spunk to it, and that was correct. It absolutely does. You really do, it kind of adds to that liveliness without being kind of silly or like you need to turn off the stability control. No, it's fine. You just really do feel how much more engaging this car is compared to the Civic. All right, now let's talk about these engines, because although they are very evenly matched on paper, in person, wow, are they different?
Absolutely. I mean, 1.6 liter 3-cylinder cranking out 300 horsepower, and it doesn't sound like you're gonna break it. It doesn't sound brittle or fragile. It's kind of rad.
No, but it does have that nice little whoosh.
Yes.
All the time.
I miss that.
And then let's talk about the gearboxes between the two, because they're both 6-speed manuals, but they are pretty different. And the Civics, I will say, is just like the whole car in general, is more refined. I think it speaks to the fact that Honda has continued to develop them over the years, whereas Toyota not so much. But I do like just how mechanical this ultimately feels. It's not quite as precise, but you do feel that gear being engaged, and I do like that.
Yeah, there's no vagueness in the gates. There's no rubberiness like you kind of get with some of the old BMW kind of shifters. And in particular, with both cars, I like the clutch engagement. It's predictable. It's sort of right where it should be. You don't feel like you kind of have to get acclimated to get a nice smooth release from acceleration.
No, and in general, these are very easy cars to drive with a manual. So, you know, you can only get this with a manual, but that shouldn't put you off if you don't know how to drive one. It's totally fine. These are actually easy to drive, and that has the automatic rev match downshifting. I personally like that feature. I also think it's a little easier to heel toe in the Civic than it is in this. I kind of find it a little difficult. I find the pedals a little spaced out. But in general, if you need to learn, you might as well learn on one of these.
Yeah, and what a great reason to learn, because these are great cars to drive and they're easy to learn on. It's like, you know, the typical Miata or Mustang where it's worth the effort to learn how to drive a manual.
Absolutely.
It's so much more engaging and fun, gives you something to do, and sure, it can be a bit of a chore if you're stuck in heavy traffic, but still giving you something to do.
So let's talk front-wheel drive of the Civic Type R versus the 3-setting all-wheel drive of the Corolla, because it really is a big difference between the two cars, possibly the biggest difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, this little dial here gives you the ability to proportion the power going front and rear, almost like the old STIs and Evos. And it doesn't noticeably change the character of the car until you're really at the car's limit. Otherwise, it's really mild-mannered and easy to scoot around at high speeds. But one thing I really like about all-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive is when you're in the middle of a turn, you can start applying the power earlier than you would with a front-wheel drive. So it's a little more, I don't know, intuitive. You know, you start straightening the car out, you start applying more power versus a front-wheel drive where you kind of have to nurse it through the turn until you start really getting those tires straightened out. They're both fast, they're both enjoyable, but personally, I'm still a rear-wheel drive or maybe some all-wheel drive cars.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to the easy to drive bit because it's all-wheel drive, you can get that feel of some rear drive dynamics with still that safety net of not like spinning into a ditch. You mentioned being able to get on the power sooner in the Corolla, and that's definitely the case with the Civic because torque steer really isn't present until you start hammering it out of a corner and you do kind of feel some wheel resistance.
Yeah, I don't really feel the torque steer in the Civic. What I just feel is an overall lack of grip because you're just simply asking too much from the front tires. You're asking it to accelerate, brake, and turn all at the same time versus all-wheel drive, front-wheel drive, where you can split it between front and rear.
Yeah, I do know that if you put the all-wheel drive system from the Corolla into the Civic Type R, it would be a much better car.
Oh, absolutely.
It would be a real home run. And so I think that says something. It's like, is all-wheel drive needed? Yes, I think it is. To make just the Type R that much better, even though as it is, pretty great.
Absolutely.
The Civic Type R.
Yeah, we are.
And so although we are driving quite sportily, let's talk about some of the boring practical stuff for a second.
Well, actually, the boring practical stuff is where this really pulls ahead. I mean, this interior is noticeably nicer and better built. I mean, it just feels more solid. It feels more refined. I mean, compared to the Corolla, this feels almost entry-level luxury.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to not so much GR versus Type R, it is Civic versus Corolla.
Or even Honda versus Toyota.
Yeah, but either way, the Civic is just, this is starting from a much stronger position from the get-go. Because you get it, like we literally just went from the GR into this, and the difference is stark. Even like, it's not just like overall quality, like this really cool design with the honeycomb dash. It's also like styling in the fashion sense, like with the red carpets and the red seats.
Yeah, despite all the flourishes with these red seat belts and everything else, it feels like a more grown up, hatchback.
Yeah, there's some style, and yet it's actually tastefully done. For a car with red seats and seat belts, this is one of the more tasteful applications.
It's racy enough, but not so much that you feel a little self-conscious about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the big difference with this generation versus the last.
Oh yeah, that was so overstyled with fake vents everywhere. This is much better, much more, I don't know, easier on the eyes, I suppose. Yeah. But I'm still not a fan of that giant rear wing, but thankfully it's not in my vision.
No, it isn't.
But honestly, if I wasn't going to the track or something, I'd probably just take it off for everyday use because I like the sleeper kind of vibe it puts out.
The interesting thing is, like, I looked in the rearview mirror, I was like, wait, where's the wing? I was expecting it to like bifurcate the hatch, and it doesn't. It's like right there, right at the top of the window, which is like really well done. So the other thing is, I do kind of like I don't know, driving position for me, I do like in this car. I feel the seat goes a little lower, and I love that the seat bottom has this I've never seen this before, like the split seat bottom that makes it easier to shift.
Yeah.
Really thoughtful feature.
I'm fine with either seat, honestly, but I feel like the side bolstering on these seats are a lot more appropriate for these kind of cars.
Yeah, even like down on the bottom without being totally pinchy on your butt.
Yeah, but I can also see how, let's say, larger passengers might feel a little constricted in these. I mean, I packed on some pounds and I can feel my ribs.
even things like, you know, like back seat space, trunk space in particular. This is huge. They're both hatchbacks, but it's not really even close. And even if you just look at them on the outside, and even sitting in here, like it is obvious that this is a wider car.
Yeah, and that's certainly a concern for people who are on a budget, who kind of want to get double duty out of a fun car that they can drive every day and use and pack stuff in it. And these fit the bill. Now, automatic brev matching, I get you. And these do it really well. I mean, you really just slam it into the lower gear and dump the clutch, and it makes it a lot quicker, a lot, I don't know, feels like you're more of a hero behind the wheel, but I still prefer doing it all myself. And I actually don't have a problem with either of these pedal setups, but I usually wear narrower shoes and I kind of crank my heel over to the right a little more than most people. But of course, the big drawback is traction. I mean, we're hustling along here really nicely, but I'm still not able to just stomp on the throttle like I am with the Corolla when I'm coming out of a turn, because we start feeling the front wheels, start scrubbing a little bit of understeer as we wash out a little. So it's fun, but let's say on a racetrack where you're actually keeping track at times, I feel like the GR might actually have a slight advantage.
Yeah, I don't. If I was going to track the car, I don't think there's. I would get the GR.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm going to drive it every day.
This is a better everyday driver.
Yeah, it's nicer, it's bigger, and like if you look at like the price difference between the two, I think this should be more expensive.
Yes.
Everything about it looks and feels like a more expensive car.
Absolutely.
So one thing is this car has the adaptive dampers, which means it has 3 different levels of comfort, and the comfort setting is basically equivalent to the Civic Si.
That's what it feels like.
So it's not really, it's not like, you know, comfy, but
more comfy.
It's more comfy, and there's no problem driving this every day.
Right. In sport mode, though, I did feel a lot more jostling than I did in the Corolla. For me, the Corolla, I don't think it actually needs the adaptive dampers because I feel like the tuning is set just perfectly to have fun on public roads like this. I think maybe if I was on track, I'd want them slightly stiffer, but I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference.
It would. I've driven the Maurizio edition, which does have stiffer suspension, and it absolutely does make a difference.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. So we've driven them both. We've had a lot of fun. They are both as great as we remember, but also a lot more different than we were expecting.
Yeah.
Now we could, you know, kind of dive more deeply into, you know, which would be better for the most people, but no. Let's keep it simple. Which one would you buy?
GR Corolla, hands down. It feels lighter even though it isn't. It's livelier, it's raw, it's what I want from a fun little hatchback.
Yeah, and for me, if it was just about a weekend fun car, easily. GR Corolla, I did find it more fun to drive. However, as more of a daily driver, I would say that I would get the Civic Type R. It's kind of like the car, if you only had one car, I'd get that. If you had more than one, I'd get that. But you know, it is just more practical. It is nicer, and personally, I think it looks better as well.
And I agree with everything you said. And like I said, it just comes down to personality. This is more me, that's more you. No one says that there's a right or wrong. They're just simply good cars now.